story from the Old Testament today comes from the book of Esther in chapter 4, but you really can't just start there. Esther is a story, and so to pick up in chapter 4 would be like walking into the middle of a movie with no frame of reference. You just don't know what's happening. So I'm going to begin by giving you a little bit of background so you know where we're at in the story. Esther is set in the capital city of the Persian Empire about 480 years before Jesus is born. The Jews who are living in the Persian Empire were among those who had been taken captive and sent into exile when another empire conquered Israel about 100 years before. And the Jews who were living in Persia had something of a marginal status. Some of them had assimilated, had adopted the Persian culture more or less. Sometimes they were tolerated or even accepted. But other times they were scorned or even persecuted. The main characters in the story of Esther are the Persian king Ahasuerus. Sometimes he's called Xerxes, that's a little easier to pronounce. His first wife is Vashti. There's an advisor called Haman. A low-level courtier or palace guard. We don't really know what his position is, but his name is Mordecai, and Mordecai is Jewish. And of course the main character is Mordecai's cousin Esther, who was an orphan, and she was raised in Mordecai's home. So Vashti, the king's first wife, becomes deposed as queen and banished after she refuses to parade around and show off her body at one of the king's drunken banquets. Vashti is a hero of feminists. But now the king needs a new queen, so he orders all of the beautiful young virgins in every province to be brought into his harem so that he can choose the one he likes the best to be queen. King Xerxes is not a feminist hero. Esther was among these beautiful young virgins who's brought in to try out for the role of queen. She does not reveal that she is a Jew, and she does her best using all of her feminine wiles to earn the king's favor and get a seat at the table of power. Esther sort of has a mixed reaction among feminists. It's not really the point anyway, but after Esther becomes queen, the king's advisor Haman gets promoted to a high position in the empire. And he orders that every time he walks through the palace gate, everybody who sees him should bow down and pay him honor. Mordecai, Esther's uncle, is among the people who hangs around the gates, but when Haman passes by, Mordecai refuses to bow. And Haman's a pretty puffed up kind of guy, and he gets really angry about this. Now some of Mordecai's friends who know that he's Jewish give that little piece of information to Haman. And Haman decides that instead of just punishing Mordecai, he wants to destroy all of the Jews all throughout the Persian Empire. And in order to get the king to pass such an order, he promises to put a whole bunch of money into the king's coffers. And the king says okay, and he signs the order, and all of the Jews are supposed to be slaughtered. So that's where today's reading picks up. I've asked a couple of readers to help with the actual text because there's a lot of dialogue, and it's helpful, I think, to hear some voices. So you'll hear the voice of a narrator, of Esther, and of Mordecai. Let us listen to the story.
When Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went through the city, wailing with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate. For one night entered the king's gate cloth with sackcloth. In every province, whenever the king's command and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and most of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther maid and her eunuch came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them.
I wonder what kind of distress Esther was feeling when she heard that Mordecai was mourning in sackcloth and ashes outside the palace gates. The text does not tell us whether Esther knew about Haman's murderous plot against the Jews. Esther might have been quite insulated from that news within the comfort of the palace. She wouldn't have been hearing from all of the Jews in the province. It's possible, maybe even likely, that she didn't know. Now, it does seem like Esther's servants know of some kind of connection between the queen and Mordecai. Why else would they come and tell her about his strange behavior and his inappropriate dress outside of the palace gates? It strikes me as a bit strange and maybe even cold that Esther asked her cousin to change his clothes and to maybe stiffen his upper lip. Imagine if you were hysterical with grief and outrage for a very good reason, and a family member told you to clean yourself up and get yourself together, without even asking what was wrong. At best, I might hope that Esther wants Mordecai to change clothes so that he can come inside the palace and meet with her. At worst, I wonder if Esther is distressed because she's afraid that Mordecai will blow her cover, afraid of being embarrassed, afraid of losing the position that she has worked so hard to obtain with the resources available to her. I wonder if Esther is distressed because she wants to keep her relationship with Mordecai and her Jewishness a secret so that she can protect herself. Whatever Esther's reasons might be, Mordecai will not take off his mourning clothes to come inside the palace. Doing so would be to take off his identification with the grief that is felt by all of the Jews of Persia. We see here that while Mordecai identifies closely with his people, Esther, in the comfort of the palace, can disconnect herself from the fate of her brothers and sisters. She can choose to stay coolly removed, to look away, a choice that betrays an extraordinary amount of privilege. But that's not the end of the story.
Then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what was happening and why. Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasury for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther, explain it to her, and charge her to go to the king to make supplication to him and entreat him for her people. Hathach went and told Esther that Mordecai had sent.
So if Esther is not yet ready to look upon the pain of the Jewish people and see herself as one of them, she's at least curious now about the events that have brought Mordecai to his conspicuous mourning outside of the palace. And so she dispatches another servant to find out what is wrong. I like to think of this as love, trying to emerge from the abyss of Esther's comfort, her privilege, her fear. What a complex life Esther is living. She's been an orphan for her whole life. For at least 5 years, she's been the queen, pretending not to be Jewish. She's had to navigate a foreign culture and customs that far outrank her social class. She has undoubtedly enjoyed the fine foods and the delights of royalty. But her husband, the king, is fickle and temperamental. She knows that her position in the court is always precarious. She relies on a surreptitious network to stay in touch with a cousin who is her closest living relative. These are not the kind of conditions that foster openness or love. These are conditions that foster suspicion, self-preservation, even self-deception. We can deceive ourselves sometimes, can't we? Esther takes a risk when she sends a servant out to hear more from her cousin Mordecai. And that one tiny step, that first risk, opens up a fissure of vulnerability, a tiny crack where love might emerge. Mordecai waits to see if Esther will stand with her people in love.
Then Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him a message for Mordecai.
All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there's but one law. All alike are to be put to death. Only if the king holds out the golden scepter to someone may that person live. I myself have not been called to the king for 30 days.
Love does not emerge. Upon hearing the messenger's report, Esther is not moved with compassion for the Jewish people. Instead, she retreats into that familiar territory of self-preservation motivated by fear. Have we not all been there? If I try to help you, Esther reasons, I will likely die. And at the very least, I will be banished like my predecessor Vashti. The risk is too great. Esther's answer to Mordecai is no.
When they told Mordecai that Esther had said, he told them to reply to Esther.
Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silence at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another quarter, but you and your families, father's family, will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this.
Mordecai pulls out all the stops. If Esther is afraid that she might die while approaching the king, Mordecai reminds her that she will likely die anyway if somebody finds out that she is a Jew. Some have even wondered whether Mordecai is making a veiled threat to out his cousin if she doesn't go along with his plan. Mordecai goes on to suggest that even if some other deliverance might yet arise, even if Esther survives and retains her position as queen, she will, like all of us, someday die. Stripped, though, of her Jewish identity, living her whole life a secret about who she really is, and without having provided a Jewish heir to continue her family name. In other words, even if her life and the lives of her people are somehow spared, now Esther's family name will be forfeited forever. Finally, Mordecai appeals to a larger plan for Esther's life. This is the closest thing we get in the book of Esther to God's plan. Perhaps, Mordecai says, perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just this moment. Perhaps this is what you were born for. I wonder if this last possibility is Esther's undoing and her rebirth all at once. If Esther's life until now has been confused and confusing, this moment must bring incredible clarity and an incredible sense of God's presence and purpose in all of it. I wonder if in this moment, Esther knows for the first time who she really is and to whom she really belongs. I wonder if here for the first time, Esther can see herself as a beloved daughter of God whose life has purpose beyond pleasing her husband and protecting her own neck. The Greek version of the book of Esther contains several bits of material that are not present in the Hebrew version and therefore are not present in our English translation. One of those Greek bits is a prayer that Esther prayed. I think it is worth hearing.
O Lord, do not surrender your scepter, and do not let them laugh at our downfall, but turn their plan against them. Remember, O Lord, make yourself known in this time of our affliction, and give me courage. Put eloquence in my mouth before the lion. Save us by your hand, O God, whose might is over all. Hear the voices of the despairing, and save us from the hands of evildoers. And save me from my fear.
Here is Esther, still afraid. Save me from my fear. But no longer living for her own comfort, no longer confused about who she is or to whom she belongs. In this prayer, we see Queen Esther in full reliance upon the God of her ancestors, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, of Sarah and Rebekah and Rachel. In this prayer, we see Queen Esther lay aside the comfort and the privilege of palace life to be in full solidarity with her people who are suffering. In this prayer, that seed of love that took root in a tiny little fissure of vulnerability emerges into a shoot full of hope and possibility. And so Esther answers her cousin.
Go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will also fast as you do. After that, I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish.
Mordecai's appeals to Esther's fear of death do not work to bring her to life. His appeal to the fear of losing her family name does not work to reconnect her with her people. But finally, when Mordecai speaks not about fear, but about who she is and what she was created for, finally love, perfect love which casts out fear, blooms in Esther. And when Esther turns to God in prayer, that love grows and emerges into its full flower. Love that dies to self, perhaps literally. And in that death finds new, abundant, and eternal life, not only for herself, but for her whole people. At Advent, we are waiting for the love which forsook all of the comforts and the privileges of heaven to dwell on earth in the humility of a stable, in the vulnerability of an infant, in the terror of a refugee. He came down so that we might have love, and so that we might be love. Because as he is, John writes, so we are in the world. So, beloved, as we await the birth and the return of the King of Love, let us love one another. Let us be in solidarity with our neighbors who are suffering. Let us lay aside the comforts and the privileges that protect us from their pain. Let us take note of how all of the ups and downs of our own existence have been preparing us for the moment when we are called to love boldly. If we love one another, John writes, God lives in us, and his love is perfected in us. And perfect love will cast out all of the fear. May you know that the love which came into the world through Jesus came for you. You are loved. So do not be afraid to love your neighbor, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is dangerous. God's perfect love is already planted in you. May it take root and grow and flower this Advent season. May it be so. Amen.